Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. We invite you to send in your questions and we will explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. Well, in this week's episode of Ask a Historian, we kind of return to our roots, if you will, and that is with three questions that we had come in the last little while here at Heritage Mississauga. And our first one comes from Raymond. And where did the name Erindale come from? Well, the name Erindale comes from a historic property, namely that of Reverend James McGraw. Born in Ireland in 1769, McGraw was educated at Trinity College, Dublin. He applied to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel for a colonial missionary post, and he came to Upper Canada, what is now Ontario, with his family in 1826. In 1827, he was appointed to the Toronto Mission on the Credit River, where he served in a simple white frame church, which had been built just earlier that year. The church was named St. Peter's. This is today St. Peter's Erindale, which is at the corner of Dundas Street and Mississauga Road. The church we see today is the second church on the site. Reverend McGraw ministered to the first church. McGraw acquired considerable land in the area and he built his own home here, which he dubbed Erindale in 1828. The name was later adopted by the settlement, which developed nearby. McGraw served the parish until his death in 1851. Reverend McGraw acquired property in what is now the Credit Woodlands area of Mississauga, and he added additional acreage to his land in 1834, amassing some 700 acres of land. His sons oversaw the building of a large log house in 1827, which was replaced in 1832 by a substantial three-story wood frame house, which was dubbed, again, Erindale. Erindale meaning Ireland in the valley, or Erin in the dale. The McGraw property was bordered, just to give yourself a modern sense of the land that Reverend McGraw controlled for a period of time. It was bordered on the north by what is today Burnhamthorpe Road, to the east by Erindale Station Road, to the south by Dundas Street, and to the west by the Credit River. Part of his property he severed and sold to his son Thomas McGraw in 1843. This was the land closer to Erindale Station Road. Another son, William McGraw, who lived between 1817 and 1888, remained on the home property, and he inherited it when Reverend James McGraw died in 1851. There's other subdivisions of the property through several of his children and grandchildren over time, but the primary estate, or the main estate, including the old Erindale house, went to William, his son. The first Erindale house, and again, a large three-story wood-framed house, I guess in our count, it would be the second Erindale house because it was a log cabin replaced by again a wood frame house. The wood frame house, it was a large three-story with a three-sided veranda, largest house in the immediate vicinity by all accounts, and certainly spoke about the affluence and importance of the individuals that lived on that property. It stood until March 3rd of 1867 when it was lost to fire. William McGraw oversaw the building of the new Erindale House later in 1867, being even more substantial than the first. Built of stone and brick and consisting of some 20 rooms and a gracious veranda that wrapped around three sides of the house, it truly was a grand estate and much, much larger than the previous Erindale House had been. This Erindale was a landmark in the community. When William died in 1888, the property was left to his nephew, Captain James Frederick McGraw, although the captain did not reside in the grand old home. The last occupants of the home were William's sister, Anna Cordelia, and William's niece, Minnie. When James Frederick died in 1902, a grand lawn party was held by the McGraw family as a final farewell to the old estate. On May 31st, 1904, the executors of the estate of William McGraw sold the property to Samuel, Stephen, George, Thomas, Arthur, and Harry Price, who established what was called the Erindale Stock Farm. The farm would later be renamed Price & Sons Dairy, one of the finest dairy farms in the vicinity. The end of Grand Old Erindale, the house itself, came just before midnight on Saturday, June 12th of 1920. The house was the entire area surrounding the house, the village of Erindale, were faced the brunt or felt the brunt of a terrific storm. And old Erindale the house was struck by lightning and was lost to fire. The house was gutted. There's some pictures of the remnants of the burnt out shell of the house. The nearby village itself, what we know as Erindale, to get back to your original question, Raymond, the nearby village has had several names over its history, including Toronto, as it was laid out originally, Credit, Springfield, and Springfield on the Credit. In 1900, village residents chose to rename the village, and they chose Erindale after the Grand McGraw estate. And again, Erindale translating to Erin in the Dale or Ireland in the Valley. The village of Erindale became part of the town of Mississauga in 1968. The name Erindale is something that became quite popular in the surrounding community as it's developed over time. And you'll see the word Erindale repeated over and over again. And things like the former name for the University of Toronto at Mississauga campus was Erindale College. The name Erin Mills takes its nod to Erindale as kind of the subdivision development of the 1960s and 70s. But the name Erindale was repeated over and over again on our landscape, but it really comes back to a single individual and a single house, and that being Reverend James McGraw of St. Peter's Anglican Church, Erindale, and his estate, Erindale, which once stood within what is now the Credit Woodlands area of Mississauga. So I hope that answers the question, Raymond. Our second question this week comes from Kim, and it's kind of tied to our first one. The question is, when was the Credit Woodlands subdivision built? Well, as we just explored, the Credit Woodlands subdivision connects to the land that was once the Erindale estate of Reverend James McGraw. Although not a direct link back, because it was the Price family that purchased the McGraw estate and then developed the Price and Sons dairy farm. And eventually it was under the Price's direction that the first phases of the Credit Woodlands subdivision was developed. So in short, Kim, there's not one specific date, because the Credit Woodlands was built in phases or different series of plans that were developed over a short period of time. But the Credit Woodlands itself was built largely between 1956 and 1970. And again, as I said, it was built in stages with several plans charting the course of the subdivision's overall development. Just to give you a kind of an inkling of it, and I may not have them all here, but it started in the south. So building started in the south down by what is the Credit Woodlands and Dundas Street, and gradually progressed northwards towards Burnhamthorpe Road. The area at the very north at Burnhamthorpe Road was kind of the last major area to be developed. A few residential side streets were developed later on, but the bulk of the Credit Woodlands subdivision progressed in that manner. And the much discussed traffic circle dates to between 1962 and 1963. Springfield Public School, in the heart of the Credit Woodlands subdivision, opened its doors in 1969. But to get back to the plans themselves, the earliest plan for their Credit Woodlands development was registered by Erindale Developments Limited on July 16th, 1956, and it's known as Plan 550. That was followed by Plan 597, which was registered on April 21st, 1958, by Erindale Developments Limited. And Erindale Developments Limited had their hands in two other plans that would follow: Plan 609, February 11th, 1959, and Plan 711 on June 10th of 1964. That was the bulk of the subdivision of Central and South Credit Woodlands. And then as you progress your way northwards, Plan 745 was developed by Rice Construction Company Limited, registered on December 20th of 1965. And then up at the very north of Credit Woodlands towards Burnhamthorpe, Plan 855, registered May 2nd, 1969 by Carbondale Holdings Limited, which had purchased property from the Prices and from their Erindale Developments Limited. So again, largely between 1956, when the first plan was registered, and 1970, when the last plan had finished its construction phases. Again, that's not all encompassing. There are a few other side streets that were developed later on, but that is the bulk of what is Credit Woodlands today, developed again between 1956 and 1970. So Kim, lots Lots of numbers and dates there, but hopefully that answers your question. And our third and final question this week comes from Omar. And he's asking, what is the story of the large boat at the mouth of the harbor at the Credit River? Well, Omar, thank you for asking. One of my favorite subjects to talk about, old boats. It's actually known as a laker, or a bulk freighter that sailed on the Great Lakes. This ship is known as the Ridgetown. She is, or was, as I mentioned, a Great Lakes freighter and serves today as a breakwater for the harbor at Port Credit. Since 1974, the Ridgetown has been a familiar sight at the entrance of the Port Credit Harbor. For many residents, it's hard to remember a time that she was not guarding the mouth of the Credit River. But the Ridgetown lived a long, long life plying her trade on the Great Lakes as a bulk freighter long before she came to be sunk as a breakwater in Port Credit back in 1974. For anyone, there's lots of pictures out there of the Ridgetown, and if you look closely under the bow of the ship where it says Ridgetown, you can just make out some faint letters that ghostly appear underneath the word Ridgetown, and that is to say that the Ridgetown is not the original name of the ship, and the original identity is peeking through the peeling paint and rust of the hull today. The Ridgetown was built as the SS William E. Corey, and Corey is spelled Corey. She was a steel-hulled, propeller-driven Great Lakes freighter. The Corey, as she was known, was built by the Chicago Shipbuilding Company and was launched on June 24th, 1905. She served as the flagship for the Pittsburgh Steamship Company and sailed out of Cleveland, Ohio. Today, she is the fourth oldest surviving Great Lakes freighter, or, as I mentioned earlier, laker. She was the near sister ship of several of other ships that were built around the same time. The Henry C. Frick, which was in service between 1905 and 1972, was renamed Michipicoten in 1964 and retired in 1972. Albert H. Gary, in service between 1905 and 1972, renamed the R.E. Webster in 1964 and scrapped in 1973. And the George W. Perkins, who was in service between 1905 and 1981, renamed the Westdale in 1964, sold to Pearson Steamships Limited of Mississauga and renamed the H.C. Heimbecker in 1977, and finally scrapped in 1981. So of the four sister ships, the only one that survives today is the Ridgetown, or what was formerly the SS William E. Corey, and again serving as a breakwater at Port Credit. The Corey's primary job was to transport iron ore, and she would transport iron ore from the ports along Lake Superior and deliver it into the southern ports along either Lake Michigan or Lake Huron or even down into Lake Erie. One fascinating story about the Corey came in her first few months of service. The Corey was many ships that were caught in the infamous Mataafa blow on Lake Superior on November 28th of 1905. During the hurricane-force storm, the Corey was driven hard aground onto the Gull Island Reef in the Apostle Islands on Lake Superior. The storm raged for 3 days and wrecked 30 vessels and claimed the lives of 78 sailors, and several ships were lost in the storm. Many mariners recalled the Mataafa blow the worst witch of November storm on the Great Lakes. The Corey survived, barely. After taking a terrible beating and being driven hard aground, a massive effort was required to free her. And at one time, the salvage force included 158 men, 4 steamers, and 2 tugs. On December 10th of 1905, the Corey was finally pulled free and refloated. The cost of salvage and repairs totaled some $100,000. Remember, the Corey was only a couple months old at that time. The Corey was repaired and resumed service in mid-1906. The Corey, having sailed the Great Lakes for over 54 years, was laid up at Duluth in early 1960. In 1963, the Corey was sold to the Upper Lakes Shipping Company and renamed the Ridgetown. The aging Ridgetown served for several more years until she was laid up at Toronto on November 17th, 1969, effectively bringing an end to her career. The Corey, or the Ridgetown, had faithfully traversed the Great Lakes for 64 years. In May of 1970, she was sold to the Canadian Dredge and Dry Dock Company of Toronto. and was brought to Nanticoke on Lake Erie and scuttled as a temporary breakwater. Later refloated, the Ridgetown was brought to Port Credit on June 21st, 1974, where she was loaded with stone and cement and was sunk to become a permanent breakwater for the harbor. The ship registry for the Ridgetown closed on June 19th, 1974, and the Ridgetown is officially owned by the city of Mississauga today. So with that, I hope, Omar, we answered your question. It's always fascinating to look at the stories of the ships of the Great Lakes, and even more particular for me, the storms that, or the Witches of November, as they were called, that raged across the lakes, and many of the stories that come out of it. It's kind of neat to think that our very own Ridgetown ties to that those epic tales. So with that, thank you for everyone for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. And please send in your questions and we'll keep exploring the stories of the city of Mississauga here at Ask a Historian. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And we'll see you in future episodes of Ask a Historian.